Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books from the shelves, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today we've got Tony Pasculi.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here.
What are we doing this time?
We are doing Masters of Doom.
Masters of Doom.
Our first nonfiction book on the podcast, but definitely a favorite nonetheless.
Interesting. So, we have the mandatory opening question there. What makes this a favorite book?
What makes this a favorite is it's about one of the most exciting times in personal computer history, when computers were starting to be useful, but still hadn't turned into appliances yet. And so it was kind of like a frontier. It was the Wild West. And people like John Carmack and John Romero were just charging out there and doing things that no one had ever done before and changing the world. So.
Yeah, it's crazy to read about this. I mean, I grew up in this time. I played computers in this time, taught myself a little bit of programming during this time. I never thought of myself as being part of a revolution. And yet now looking back at it, especially the way it's framed in this book, what a revolution it really was.
It was astonishing. And I was lucky to be part of that. Also, I was around at that time. I'm a little bit older than those guys, and I was not working in games, but I was at Microsoft in the 80s, when like before Windows 2 even shipped, and it was just, every new computer that came out enabled just incredible new capabilities for gaming and for software and productivity and business, and it was just astonishing. Like one of the things that happens over the course of this book is first, local area networks become a thing, and then the internet becomes a thing. Mm-hmm. Remember when the internet wasn't a thing?
I do remember when the internet was not a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember running up ridiculous phone bills, long-distance phone bills, just to be on AOL and chat with people,
Yeah. Did you ever do BBSs? I never did.
I did, actually. Okay. I did a fair bit of BBSs.
Interesting.
I didn't swap shareware over BBSs the way they describe in the book, but I did swap other things.
Yeah. Oh, so we're sort of getting into this, but I feel like we should say the subtitle of this book is How Two Guys Created an Empire and Transformed Pop Culture. And the Doom in the title is the incredible shareware success. Doom, the first, not the first, but the game that sort of launched the 3D shooter genre. Castle Wolfenstein 3D actually predates Doom.
Yep.
But it wasn't quite the phenomenon that Dune was.
Yeah. And I can remember playing these when they were contemporaries. I mean, by the time I got my hands on Wolfenstein, it was a little bit outdated. But, I paid money for the Doom releases when they came out. Quake, I drug my feet a little bit on Quake, just waited for the prices to fall, but worked my way through that series as well.
One of the things that made me sad was that the first-person shooter genre just didn't really do it for me. And so I was blown away by Wolfenstein as a tech demo. It's like, oh my God, look at what these guys are doing. You're moving through, because one of the games I remember very well was Wizardry, where you explore a wireframe dungeon sort of step by step.
Yep.
And to be able to not step by step, but to move briskly, even run through a dungeon that wasn't wireframe but fully texture mapped was incredible. But then the game itself was just didn't do it for me. Yeah, so.
Well, it definitely, and repeatedly throughout the game, Carmack and Romero in particular is always, there's got to be blood, more gore, more blood. And I made a note at some point because like 5 or 6 times in the narrative, it degenerates into this rant about we have to have more blood. It's got to be bloodier. It's got to be shocking.
Yeah.
As a kid playing these, I never thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is shocking. It was kind of neat, but I think I would have I don't know that it upped my enjoyment level. The enjoyment level for me came from the skill of playing the game.
Yeah. That wasn't a turnoff for me. It was neutral. It was completely neutral. But it's just, it was a Twitch game. I'm not a big Twitch gamer. Yeah. I didn't want to just, high response rate, I wanted to think strategically about things.
I enjoy me versus the dungeon. For the death matches, if you got a few friends together on a LAN, that was good fun. But as far as just, plugging into a server and playing people across the globe or the country. You know, I'm not going to put the time in to be good enough to compete at that level, and it's just not it's not entertainment to me.
Did you ever play Unreal from not from? Okay. One of the things I loved about that, I thought their graphic design was a little bit better. And the engine, I think, was comparable to the Doom engine or the Quake engine at that point. But I played that game by turning it to the lowest difficulty level and playing it basically like an adventure game rather than a shooter. I was just wandering around, looking at the environment, and occasionally dealing with a pesky enemy. And that was a lot of fun. Yeah, whereas Doom and Quake just never were really for me. Yeah.
Now, what was fascinating to me, I don't know a whole lot about software design. I can code a little. I used to be able to code a little bit. I taught myself BASIC. I learned Fortran and COBOL in college.
Oh my God, you learned COBOL.
I learned COBOL. I was pretty decent at COBOL. And a couple of other structured languages that I have dipped in that are relevant to like working in After Effects or working in DVD authoring, but not a whole lot of coding. They talk about the engine development, right? You know, Carmack is creating this engine, and then Romero is on his heels trying to find ways to utilize the engine and also making suggestions to push Carmack. But it's like every time the engine is done, this weird thing happened within the company where, you know, where Romero wanted to take it and just, let's make some products using this engine. Let's milk this engine for all it's worth.
Yeah.
And all Carmack wants to do is start over. He wants to build something new and push it further.
Yeah, they don't talk about Carmack being autistic in the book, but that's the strong impression that I get.
He certainly has that behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, someone that voluntarily slept on the floor for months just because he didn't think he needed a bed, you know, until Romero bought him a mattress and threw it on the floor in his room and said, at least get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, and he had no joy in the games themselves. It was only creating the engine for other people. And he just wanted to move on to the next best thing.
Yeah, and he also, I mean, they talk about the hacker ethic. A couple of times in the book, somebody mentions patenting something. And Carmack's like, if you ever try to patent it, I'm out the door. I quit. You know?
Yeah. I don't know that that's necessarily a hacker ethic. It was his ethic. And it's been kind of admirable on the part of id that they have open source most of these games along the way. So if you want to go back and study, you can just get the source code to Doom and peruse it at your leisure, or Quake 2 for that matter. Yeah. They're just out there on the internet, which is an incredible gift to humanity. It's because Carmack was no joke. He was on the cutting edge of this stuff. Like, he was reading research papers from people in high-end graphics labs that were saying, hey, we think it's possible to do this, and here's an algorithm, and we've implemented a proof of concept. And he would take that proof of concept and turn it into a fully rendered game engine and put it to work like no one else ever had. So, yeah,
they spent so much time and stuff I just don't think about. Their first success is they got a PC to do side scrolling.
Yeah.
How anticlimactic is that? I mean, from a gamer's point of view, it's like you tell me you've got a screen that doesn't move. Just seems ancient. I mean, talking like Aclabeth, you talked about like line drawing, page at a time thing. The fact that their huge triumph, their breakthrough moment was the fact that they got smooth side-scrolling action out of a PC.
Yeah, he didn't get into enough technical detail there that I understood exactly what that issue was. I mean, I can recognize sort of the achievement it was by how they describe it. I remember I did some graphic programming on IBM PCs back in the day. And the big issue for us, we were doing a character-based operating system. The big issue for us was that if you wrote to video memory while the computer was reading from video memory, you would get snow on the screen. So you had to be careful to time your writing to not coincide with the computer reading, and you could trigger an interrupt from the computer to say, "Hey, I'm not going to be looking at video memory for this length of time." So it gives you 50 instructions worth of time that you can do some stuff to blast out your stuff to the computer memory. And it was really tough to fit in as much as you could into those little bits, into the horizontal sync and the vertical sync. And I don't know if that was his innovation or it was remapping the computer memory or something. I don't know what it actually was.
Yeah, the author tries to describe it, but he really did the way he tried to describe it says to me he does not understand what he's trying to sell us.
He does not. And that's one of the unfortunate things about this book is I think he conveys a lot of the excitement But he is deficient in technical knowledge to the point where he just makes serious blunders.
Yeah, he's got some problems with chronology too.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things about the writing I did not appreciate, but the story was really fascinating, amazing.
Yeah.
And then you get to the afterwards and you look at the list of people that he interviewed to make this book, and okay, there's literally no one in this book he didn't talk to. I mean, he definitely put in the legwork and the research.
He did talk to the right people. He did put in the work. I think he needed a technical reader to go through, and I noticed a couple. There's only one that I highlighted. He refers to, at one point, he's talking about, let's see, who is it? Mike Abrash? But they're talking about DirectX being developed at Microsoft, and he disparagingly calls it a skunk work, as in, oh, this poor guy got assigned to do skunk work, which he thinks is work that smells bad. But in fact, what he actually means is Skunk Works, which is a super secret company within a company. Yeah, and it's a prestige thing. It's not, so he's got it exactly backwards.
Yeah, he did that actually. Early on, he did some weird stuff with language too. They have just handed Romero the side-scrolling thing, and he's blown away by it. This is quoting from the book. He saw their destiny, their future rich personages. It was so devastating, he found he couldn't move, couldn't get out of his seat. He was destroyed. This is describing somebody suffering, depression. This is somebody who's seen something terrible. And in fact, this is exactly the opposite of, he suddenly realized, hey, this is our point. This is where we make it. And the next thing he says is, guys, we're out of here, right?
Yeah.
We're out on our own. So that's, I don't know. Maybe the guy's Canadian?
I don't know. But these detract from the book a little bit, but it's the book about these guys in this era. Yeah. And it doesn't detract enough that you should keep you from reading it. No.
And there's some, this is another one. So Commander Keen was one of their first successes, if not their first success. And the author, in describing it, says, Commander Keen was #1 on the shareware charts, emerging as the first and only game to break the coveted top 10. How can there be a coveted top 10 if nobody has broken into the top 10?
I think the top 10 includes all PC software.
Oh, so maybe they're competing against spreadsheets and
the first
databases.
Game. It's like up there with VisiCalc and Lotus and WordStar.
I'm reading that, and in my mind, there's a top 10 list of games, but the first one ever to break into it is this game. Oh, wait, okay.
Yeah.
Self-canceling logic there. Anyway, all right, enough picking on the author for the moment anyway.
Yeah.
It is so weird to me to read about this from the perspective of the people who built it. Because again, I played these games when they were contemporary.
Yeah.
And moving from Doom to Quake, I thought it was neat, but I didn't feel, oh my God, this is an entirely new vista. My worldview has been rewritten. It was just another kind of neat game. But you've got, and at the point that's happening, the two Johns have separated, and Romero's waiting for the Quake engine to come out so that he can release Daikatana.
Yeah.
And then he sees the demo of it at a convention, and he's like, oh, dude, we have to redo everything we've done because it's got to run on this new engine.
Yeah.
We can't possibly release it on the Quake 2 engine because it'll just look bad in comparison.
He had the Quake engine and he was waiting for Quake 2.
It was the Quake 2, not the...
Because Quake 2 was a sequel, he assumed the engine would be fairly close, just some minor upgrades. But Carmack had engineered it so completely that he had to tear out all their existing code and start from scratch. Yep. And that was a disaster of a business decision. Never do that.
Yeah. Well, and this is such in a way, it's a formula story, right? So you get this small group together that they think they're focused on a single vision, and they have, I hate the term meteoric success because meteors go down, they don't rise. But they've got this phenomenal early success, and the money's rolling in faster than they know what to do with it other than, buy Ferraris. Yeah. And then suddenly they actually come to a point where they don't see eye to eye on what the future is. Carmack, again, all Carmack wants to do is code. Yeah. All Romero wants to do, well, it was release games. Now it's turning into play games.
That's another part of their downfall. It was kind of sad.
Yeah.
Sad to see Romero because he was he was a talented programmer. He was, when they first met, Romero was a better programmer than Carmack. Carmack quickly eclipsed him, but he was still an incredible designer. He had a great vision for utilizing Carmack's engines. And then he just got obsessed with death matches, and he just kind of, yeah.
Yep, that was meteoric.
Yeah.
In the proper sense of the word.
Meteoric descent.
But yeah, and they split, and Carmack takes his company and he trims it back down to that core number of 3 or 4 people focused on the code. And Romero just starts hiring anyone who comes up to him and says, "Hey, I like video games." He ends up with a company that's got hundreds of employees, and he still can't turn out.
Romero is almost the poster boy for, don't take VC money. Actually, they didn't take VC money. They took publisher money, but they took so much publisher money up front that they thought, we can afford to rent an office that costs, $1 million a year? Or $1 million a month?
It wasn't $1 million a month, but it was a stunning number.
It was
especially considering when this was.
Yeah.
And then it ended up being an awful office in terms of practical use for programming. They rented a penthouse that was glass on all 4 sides, floor to ceiling. Programmers like it dark. So they talked about, they had cubicles and the programmers were stapling black felt over their cubicles and going in through flaps as if they were in tents so they could code in the dark.
Yeah. But they were also, their burn rate was way too high. They really depended on Daikatana being a success to make it. And of course, they did everything in their power to not make Daikatana a success. It was badly coded. They started again with the Quake 2 engine. They didn't have anybody on staff who was even close to the equivalent of Carmack. And Romero was sadly phoning it in because he was just still death matching and dating and driving Ferraris really fast. And neither one of those companies really survived. I mean, I don't even know what happened. IonStorm actually released a couple of games because they had so much money to throw at other people. But it didn't really survive the departure of Romero for very long either. I think without Romero around, Carmack, well, maybe he just got distracted. This is he got into aerospace, and then later got into VR, and maybe that would have happened anyway. But I kind of think if those guys could have stayed together, they would have evolved. Aerospace would have stayed a hobby, and they would have evolved into VR gaming. Maybe. I mean, that was what they were trying to do. That immersive environment was what they were all about. So it seems a logical progression there. Yeah. So it's a shame. And it's another thing I like this story is because these two guys, because it's really about the two Johns. These two guys were so close and so good together. They're like the Lennon McCartney of, PC gaming. Yep. And when they split up, it's devastating. And there's just. Yeah, and neither side went anywhere.
Yeah. Well, okay, I can't say that because we'd have Quake. Yeah. Quake 2. Yeah. Quake 3. Well, let's not forget Quake 4.
Quake 3? Do we? We have 4 Quakes?
I believe there's a 4th one. Definitely.
I know there was a Quake Arena.
So that's what I'm counting in one of those, I believe.
Yeah, that's probably Quake 3.
Maybe that was Quake 3. Maybe there wasn't a Quake 4, but there was definitely a Quake Mission Pack.
There was a Doom 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got the Dooms on my Xbox 360. I still stick them in from time to time.
You have an Xbox 360 still? Wow.
State of the art, man. It's funny because Sony shut down all the servers, years ago. But whenever you fire it up, it still insists on attempting to connect to, I don't even remember what the name of it's not Battle.net, but whatever. It attempts to connect to its own base. And then, after a few minutes, it decides, okay, that's not going to work. I'll let you go ahead and play the game now.
I was, in high school, I was obsessed with video games, and I never owned a console. So my obsession took me to the arcades, and I played Defender and Asteroids and Joust and, all the rest. I have found, maybe it's a function of age, but maybe it's a function of, there was something about video games at that time they were so direct and immediate and rough, raw, that the modern games are just too slick, simultaneously slick and cumbersome. Mm-hmm. That I just am not as engaged by I've tried to download the latest Doom game or a game that Nick Logue raves about, Ghost of Tsushima, which is supposed to be great, and I'm just like, it takes an hour to download, and then you got to patch it, and then there's a tutorial you got to get through, which is like a couple hours long, and I'm just like, I'm not having fun.
Yeah.
This is not fun.
Yeah. I've tried to play Ghost Recon. I found
Yeah.
it in a $5 bin somewhere and
Yeah.
stuck it in. And oh my God, the learning curve on that. I'm like, no. And again, this is a game that is clearly designed to be multiplayer. There is single player content, but it's clearly designed for the multiplayer experience. So, oh well. But this is why I have a 360 and nothing more current, is because if I get into it, I'll start putting way too many hours into that. So I try to keep it, casual.
Right. I probably have a bunch of old 360 discs I can give you.
That would be cool. Yeah, I'm kind of curious. When the book winds down, it basically just stops. We get to this point where the two Johns have split. Both of their companies have more or less gone downhill. Mm-hmm. And then the book just kind of gives you a one-paragraph summary of Romero went off to do this, and Carmack went off to do this, and it stops. I assume they're still out there.
They are. In fact, Romero just released a book that he wrote called Doom Guy, Life in First Person, which, I thought, I'm going to try to read this before our podcast, and I did not get through it because it is primarily autobiographical. And at least the first several chapters are about him growing up with his abusive father, and it was not a quick or pleasant read. So I didn't get to the point where he's actually paired up with Carmack yet. So, but that's out there for those who are interested in an update. Yeah.
And this is a place where, again, I felt like the author handled it poorly, because he had an abusive father, and then that was replaced with an abusive stepfather. Lucky kid. But you've got one of the earliest scenes, if not the opening scene of the book, is him getting beaten for having gone to a video arcade. Yeah. His stepfather caught him at a video arcade, at a pizza parlor, actually, grabbed him by the back of the head, pulled him out of there, took him home, and beat him. And yet, just a few chapters later, you've got the stepfather buying him an Apple II computer, and the stepfather driving him to the college campus so he can hang out around the computer geeks. And I had a hard time reconciling in my head that behavior.
Yeah, I think it lines up with the abusive part, in that, he wasn't punished for playing video games. He was thrashed. That sounds like lashing out. That sounds like incoherent. Oh, I'm just angry at you. Maybe the video games are a reason. Maybe it's just something else going on in my life. And then the other possibility is that he was like trying to steer him towards, because even though he got beat up by his stepfather, it didn't stop him from going to play video games.
No. If the author be believed, the very next day he was back at it,
So maybe, giving him some credit, he was trying to steer his son towards a productive path in computers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Romero's mom was like that, right? She, if he wanted to do computers, she wanted him to go to an engineering school and study computers. And until he did that, she wasn't going to help him. Yeah. I guess at some point he got to say, "Look, Ma."
Yeah. I would have killed for an Apple II computer when I was in high school.
They were so cool.
They were so expensive.
Spent many a happy hour. So my dad was a professor, and he taught physics, but in the physics department, of course, they had a lot of computing. And one of the other faculty members there had an Apple II in one of the labs that he personally was writing games for.
Nice.
And I was one of his test audience.
Nice.
I don't remember that. Swashbuckler was the name of it. Swashbuckler. And the guy,
Sid Meier?
You played with, you were a swashbuckling pirate. You had a hat with the plume, and you had a choice between a lance, I think, not a lance, a rapier and a saber. And then as you sidestepped forward, scorpions or spiders or something else would come at you, and you'd use the rapier. You could either hit low, hit straight, or hit high. So it's like you had 5 commands: step forward, step back, attack high, medium, or low. And it was kind of a side scroller, but you weren't moving at any great speed. It was tap to move one spot, tap to move one spot, tap to move one spot. So as fast as you could tap, it would, Anyway, but yeah, and then I learned a fair bit of programming. The high school that I went to had them in the library, which is where I spent pretty much every lunch hour.
I was very lucky that my school had one computer, and bought at the urging of the math teacher, and he offered a computer programming class. So we got to actually take a class and learn how to use it.
Yeah. Dad bought us a VIC-20 whenever they were contemporary, when Captain Kirk was advertising them. And
VIC-20.
I could do some amazing things with that VIC-20. And I remember buying magazines and then sitting there and laboriously typing the code in. And the fun thing with the VIC-20, God, we've gotten so far away from the book here, but the fun thing with the VIC-20 was it had special characters on every key. In addition to a V being a V, it might be a partially shaded square and a polygon of some other sort. So you did a code key and hit the V, and that weird shape would pop up. Yeah. But you could, L code key O would give you a 2-character thing that meant load, right? But it only took up 2 bytes of memory as opposed to the word load, which would have taken up 4 bytes of memory.
Yeah, because the VIC-20 did not have a lot of memory.
So when you typed it in, you had to type it in using the code keys. But the other weird thing about it was as soon as you tried to go back into the program, if you typed list to relist it, it would replace the codes with the actual thing.
Yeah.
So they had these programs that ran to the very limits of the memory, but if you made a single typo, you couldn't go back to repair it because in listing the program out, it suddenly became larger than the memory and it would truncate the bottom quarter of your program. You literally had to start from scratch.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I remember the VIC-20. I worked at a computer camp. It was like, you'd have archery and canoeing and also computer programming classes. And I was one of the computer instructors. And we used this Commodore 64, which was a relative of the VIC-20. Yeah. One of the tragedies of my life is that I saved up all my money working in the summers and on breaks to buy a computer. And I really had my heart set on Apple II and I couldn't afford it. And I got sidetracked by the TI 99-4, which was the most locked down piece of garbage ever. You could program in BASIC, but you couldn't program in assembly without a special cartridge. You couldn't load games onto it from a tape or from a disc. You had to buy these, and you couldn't type lowercase letters. It was just, it was appalling. Yeah, I should have bought a TRS-80 for half the price, or kept saving for a real Apple II.
I had a buddy that could do miracles on a TRS-80.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it was a garbage computer in its own way, but it was so open and accessible that people were doing amazing things with it, and you could participate in a community. They got around a lot of its faults. The TI-99-4 did not engender much of a community because it was so locked down.
Yeah.
So.
And then the early days of PCs, and then the second generation of PCs when you had to install a program to slow the computer down so you could still play the shareware games you had downloaded for the earlier version of the computer. Yep. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Good times.
Indeed.
So a couple other things. So Michael Abrash figures in this book, and he was kind of a personal hero of mine, even more than John Carmack, because I didn't play John Carmack's games, but I knew Michael Abrash from a column he wrote on assembly language programming in one of the print computer magazines that existed at that time. It was always my favorite thing to read. Whenever an issue came out, I'd go right to Michael Abrash's column and read that cover to cover. And he ended up working at Microsoft briefly, which was exciting, and then got hired away by id, and then went back to Microsoft. But he was just an amazing, amazing assembly language programmer who was doing things that were just like, people were like, how did you do that? And he goes, well, I was looking at the opcodes, and I reasoned that there must be a secret instruction that wasn't documented, and I found it. So stuff like that. Yeah. And the other thing that was exciting about this book was the whole shareware phenomena, which they talk about, which we kind of act like we have that today, but what we have today is freemium, which is different than shareware. Shareware back then was a plastic Ziploc bag with a floppy disk and a printed sheet of instructions. Yep. And you would go down to your local computer store and you'd pay $15 for a program, or you download something off the BBS and you go, oh yeah, this is the first part of it. I can donate or I can subscribe for more. Yeah. So that was an exciting time also. Yeah,
it was. And they really play that up in the book too. The fact that it not only survived but thrived using this counterintuitive model of almost giving your product away. Yeah. And then charging for the updates, as it were, for the next installation.
What they did was really slick. They had sort of a pyramid because there was a code of ethics for shareware. to be proper shareware, the thing you distributed had to be fully functional in and of itself. You couldn't distribute something as shareware that says, yeah, it's a spreadsheet, but you can't print unless you pay for printing. If any features that were hidden behind a paywall had to be strictly optional features. And for a lot of software, there weren't a lot of strictly optional features that made sense. But for a game, the next 2/3 of the game, which are just additional levels, are the perfect thing. It's like, yes, give me more of exactly this, please. It was episodic, and it was brilliant because, you know, even today, the hardest thing is not to get paid for your software so much as to get people to even want it in the first place. So they solved that problem.
Indeed. And the way they describe it, now, of course, they always come up against this thing, you know, for shareware, they were dominating the market, but there's always that proviso. For shareware, they were dominating the market. And they'd compare it to retail, and it was like they were small potatoes. That, I don't know. I rarely paid full retail price for games, you know, and again, Xbox 360, I want the $5 bin down at GameStop type of deal. But it just seems like they're discounting, that the big players are discounting a perfectly viable kind of a warm puppy approach, if you would. Get it in their house, let them enjoy it, you know, for $15, and then hit them with a $60 for episode 2 and episode 3.
Yeah. Well, the internet has kind of flipped the script on that because people don't want to pay for stuff. They don't like things being behind paywalls. They don't like DLC. They scream about DLC. DLC is sort of the modern equivalent where I'll buy the game for $60, and then if I like it, I can buy more of the game. And people hate that. They hate it, or at least they complain about it, because the internet has really taught people that you shouldn't have to pay for anything. And there's a lot of people who have taken that to heart.
Well, yeah. I'm not a fan of paying for things, but sometimes you got to bite the bullet.
I'm a fan of paying for things. I take pride in supporting people who are doing things that are exciting.
There's that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
I think that people deserve to be compensated for their time and their ingenuity and whatnot.
Yeah. Much as we are compensated for our time and ingenuity in putting on this podcast.
Oh, absolutely. The donations are just flooding in.
Yeah.
That's not what we're here for.
It's not what we're here for.
No. Hacker ethic. All right. I don't know how much time we actually spent talking about the book versus Memory Lane, but...
Yeah, we're mostly talking about that era, but I think, you know, Kishner, for all his faults, I think does a really good job of capturing the excitement of that era. So, and for that, this is one of my favorite books. I mean, the first time I read it like in a few hours. I just couldn't put it down. And then even revisiting it a few years later, I was just brought right back to that time. And now this is my third read, and it's kind of like I see more of the warts. I'm not so caught up in it anymore. But still, it's well worth a reread.
This is a first read for me, and I really did enjoy it. The chapters are a little bit on the long side. It makes it hard to be the last thing you do before you go to bed. So I had to actually carve out daytime for reading this, but I did enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it got me very excited and very nostalgic and all the feels.
I liked this enough even on reread that as I picked up Doom Guy by Romero, and then I picked up a couple of other Kishner's books just to check him out because he writes about interesting stuff. He wrote a book about Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax and the Rise of Dungeons and Dragons. Rise of the Dungeon Master. Yeah, that's another exciting time. So.
Yep, another time I was part of a revolution I didn't know I was revolutioning.
So, all right, what's next?
Next, we're going to go do a little bit of sci-fi. I'm going to pick A Heavy Time by C.J. Cherry.
All right.
So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.